lights and cigarette smoke, you see. That's how I want it to stay. 'Cause when my baby comes to my house, we never go out to play.
Okay, Matt, I really appreciate you joining me. I always enjoy sitting down with musicians who have done something in the field of blues, rockabilly, in that great throwback to an era of the 40s and 50s where swing was real swing before we entered that plodding era of progressive music that all but destroyed a lot of great music in the 70s. Things got a little too pretentious. What I love about you and I love about your band is that you guys are all about the basics. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm flattered.
You know, you've been doing this now, as I understand it, for the better parts of 2 decades of music.
And it's closer to 4, but there's been some diversions along the way. Yeah.
So the Swingin Blackjacks are how old?
Swingin Blackjacks started in about 1998, but I started playing in a serious band in about 1986 or 87.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
Did you find growing up in the 80s, having a chance to ply your craft and become a musician that's very passionate about what he was watching and experiencing, did you find that growing up during the MTV generation, did that inspire you, or did that in some cases maybe show you that commercialism was starting to spread as quickly as possible? What did you cull from your experiences growing up in the 80s?
Well, I mean, I'm maybe older than you suspect, so I started playing guitar and started messing around with music in the 1970s, and my original interest was more towards like early punk bands and new wave bands, and in a way I've always kind of seen them with commonalities to early rock and roll people, because through the earlier part of the 20th century, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but there was a little more importance put on instrumental competence, right? So, I mean, if you were not a great player, you wouldn't go far as a musician in the 20s or 30s playing with jazz bands or swing bands. And those forms were what was popular music back then, right? After the Second World War, and with the advent of what was categorized at the time as race music, there were people who were more naive artists. They were self-trained, or they were trained through an oral tradition rather than learning at a music school to play piano or horn or guitar or whatever. So there was a little more of a creativity from within, done with a more kind of intuitive way. And that's what attracted me to punk rock. But the other thing about growing up in the 70s is, as far as my exposure to mid-century rock and roll, is the 50s were nostalgia in the 70s. So there were high schools that would have grease dances, and there were films and television at the time that were, you know, things like the American Graffiti film and Happy Days and a couple of spin-offs, you know, and takeoffs on that kind of thing. So I got interested in 1950s music, and when I was a little kid in the 60s, I remember hearing bands that were heavily influenced by rockabilly. One of my favorite bands when I was a kid was Creedence, and I mean, their guitar playing, their song structures, their big hit, Susie Q, I mean, it's a 50s rock and roll song. And I remember hearing, you know, it wouldn't have been while any of those artists were necessary. Well, I mean, some of them were still alive, but they'd kind of reached their zenith and were kind of coasting on it. But I remember hearing Elvis on the radio when he was still alive. I remember hearing DJs, you know, and here's a golden oldie, you know, tune from Buddy Holly, something like that. So that all kind of fueled my musical tastes at the time. But when I was getting into guitar in the late 70s and early 80s, I was playing along with Clash and Sex Pistols and Elvis Costello records and Blondie and things like that. And all those bands, they all, you know, cherry picked some covers from early rock and roll as well. So
It's the evolution that's extraordinary, isn't it? The fact that
yeah,
the nostalgic generation that we now experience goes beyond just a simple generational jump. You have people who are embracing the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. I mean, look, when I was growing up effectively in the 80s and becoming a musician myself in the early 90s, it was looking
yeah,
back at the 70s, right? The holy triumvirate of Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Deep
yeah,
Purple. The same way
yeah.
that in the 70s you were looking back into the 50s and then being
Mhm.
inspired by bands like Creedence Clearwater Revival, which to this day, I mean, you talk about a unicorn of a composition of musicians, right? The flame
Yeah,
that burns bright,
yeah,
dims twice as fast, and we never got that, did we? It's interesting to see how the best moments we have, you know, for certain people, it was a very short period of time, but it was life changing.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And for yourself, as someone who took so many different paths, I mean, even though you were clearly developing an appreciation for rockabilly and Elvis Presley, here
Hmm.
you were indulging in punk that, as we know, would also fuse and morph into extraordinary different things. You know, I think back of the late 70s as one of the most exciting eras of fusion and experimentation with bands like Television and the Talking
Hmm.
Heads.
Yeah.
Now punk was somehow taking that visceral quality and
Hmm.
manifesting itself into all sorts of other styles of bands, whether it was Joy Division or some of the 80s. What am I thinking of? New Order, was it afterwards? After Joy
Hmm.
Division, they turned into New
That's
Order.
correct. Yeah.
And so I think back to myself, it evolved. It wasn't just something that appeared. It was the culmination of the experiences you yourself described when you were a young man.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. And the thing with early rock and roll, it's influenced by so many other things. So what I like about like the bands that I find have strongly influenced me, they don't do just one kind of rock and roll take. They have things that sound bluesier and they have things that sound more country and western. And another musician said to me one time, I think it was Dr. Nick from a Toronto band, Dr. Nick and the Roller Coasters, they're all roots of the same tree, right? And that's always stuck with me as a good explanation for the music that I love and the music that I enjoy performing and suits me best.
Well, and you being like your admirers and fans and those in the audience, you're this amorphous creature that clearly wants to find fulfillment in the music that you perform. Do you
Mm-hmm.
get more fulfillment stretching into the nostalgic, deep, cosmic pool, or do you sometimes find that playing something more recent and maybe original is what brings you that kind of creative fulfillment? What is it like these days for you as a musician who's active in this incredibly bizarre misanthropic world we're living in?
For me, I've always found that um, performing original music is kind of conveys the most honesty to an audience and to the other musicians. And I think people generally, if they're into the music, if they're into the moment, they sense the genuine characteristics of the performance. But there are some, cover songs that I've played over the years that I love doing every time I do them. But I think overall, from my perspective, you get the most truth out of something you've created yourself, if that makes sense.
It truly does. And
Yeah.
it's daunting. It's not easy creating original creative or artistic output.
Yeah.
It usually has to be triggered, I find, by personal experience or some kind of in the moment zeitgeist quality that makes you want to pour out your soul and actually construct a composition. What has it been like, again, in the context of living with time having passed the way it is? What is it like to create the type of music that your audience can go back in time and embrace a much simpler, healthier time of music rather than, as you said very eloquently, an over digitized, overly technical oriented type of composition? How do you feel about keeping it simple for your audience?
Well, as far as keeping it simple, working as a trio is, is about as simple as you can get and actually having a band, right? A duo is not a band, in my opinion. It's valid, but the simplicity of a trio has always appealed to me. I hate to bring in, the commercial aspect of it, but it's not just the commercial aspect of a trio being simpler to manage. It's also there's less moving parts. So the simplicity of a trio is certainly a help in keeping the sound of the band streamlined. I get occasions when people mention that it's the sound of the band is bigger than a trio. So that's a lovely compliment to receive. We're obviously doing something right, and we're able to fill musical space with only 3 musicians doing something. Lately, Gary Kendall, my bass player, and Adam David, my drummer, have been working on developing more in the way of background vocals and harmony vocals. Whereas when we were more of a bar band, I'd just be bringing in songs and I'd either send them a recording of an original or a cover that I want to do, and they'd learn them at home, and we kind of develop them over repeated performances of the same thing. I just find, a trio is also easier to manage from the point of making sure everybody's where they need to be, when they need to be there, and ready to go when it's time for the show to start. So,
well, it's very aptly put. There is a dynamic quality. I just look around these days with the wave of nostalgia we discussed. I have many friends and associates who have bought Triumph and Rush tickets. Clearly, there is a love for that triumvirate that they never forget. Although I found this kind of interesting. The more research I did about certain bands in the 70s, the more I realized how many of them eventually went from a 3 or a foursome and then got an extra keyboard player or added another dimension that became a staple of their shows. You're more of a purist, though, right? Do you prefer it just being the 3 of you, or are you occasionally thinking to yourself, let's add something to a set and see if we can elevate the music a little more?
I think for what we do, it works well as a trio. Having said that, when we were recording the 11th song, I don't even know whether to call them records now. They're CDs. our new CD, our new record. I co-produced that with Gary Kendall, and Gary's the bass player as well. One of the songs was sounding a little bit spare. Gary's the more experienced musician of between the two of us, and he has produced other recordings. So he pitched the idea of having a keyboard, and we were thinking, well, should it be a piano? Should it be an organ? We ended up getting somebody to record an organ part from our bed tracks, and we added that, and it's the more slow blues ballad recording. It's called I Travel Light. So we got Jesse O'Brien to record an organ part and mixed it in, and it suits it well. It's not dominant, but it just gives it a little extra body to the song. Right?
What do you enjoy more, Matt? Do you prefer being in the studio and experimenting and developing and laying down all the different parts and ultimately watching the production process? Or would you rather be out playing and seeing what these studio interpretations can do when you get a shot of playing in front of live restaurants and festivals and big audiences?
I've always been more of a live performer than a recording artist. My recording experience is not wide. When I'm doing it, I enjoy the process, but it's not the primary reason that I've been doing this for so long. The immediacy of a live performance is what keeps me wanting to go on with music, and I enjoy the reaction I get when the show's going well. But I do enjoy recording, and I like being able to, fix things. I've done recordings when it was pretty much live off the floor, and there have been good results. The recent record was very painstaking compared to my other experiences. So we recorded beds with a scratch vocal and a scratch guide guitar track. And then we did the vocals over top of the bass and drums and the guitars. And the engineer that we'd hired, a guy named L. Stu Young, who's quite well known and has worked on Juno Award-winning records. He's done some work with Prince at one point, which is a pretty broad spectrum of artists, going from rockabilly to Prince, and Prairie Oyster and Gowan, I think, was another artist that L. Stu worked with. He had me do a vocal, then a guitar lead, so I didn't blow my voice out. And I would never have thought of that. I would have just thought, well, this is the part we do next. This is the part we do next. So that was, just a small detail that I was, happy to discover by working with more experienced, seasoned technicians. Yeah.
I think any opportunity to collaborate with Larry Gowan is worthwhile. One of the one of the great Canadian treasures of the last 40 years of music industry success.
I remember his stuff on the radio from when I was in high school and college. So yeah, and I have great respect for anybody who has that sort of longevity and that success in their career. The first big concert I took my son to when he was a teenager was Iron Maiden at Ontario Place at the Molson Amphitheater. I would not classify myself as an Iron Maiden fan per se, but the age range of the audience and the fact that it was sold out, and the mastery with which artists of that caliber can command a stage, I have huge respect for.
They are absolute titans of that era, which is all
Exactly.
the more all the
Yeah.
more why it's so shameful that they're still not somehow in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you know?
There's many who shouldn't be, and there's many who should be.
Well,
And
that was
it's,
very diplomatic, Matt. Very
yeah,
diplomatic.
everyone who likes rock and roll knows that the hall, bless their hearts, don't always get it right. Right.
Well, they don't, and they really. It's a shame when you have living members of bands, classic
Mhm.
bands, that get passed over because it's just begging for an opportunity to enjoy them while they're still alive. It's
Absolutely.
and of course the criteria is always controversial. But I'm very, as much as I consider myself a purist for any Hall of Fame, especially in sports.
Hmm.
I think there are certain musicians who make certain achievements that, as far as I'm concerned, herald their need to be there. And one of the biggest ones is
Hmm.
Boston. I mean,
Hmm.
Boston is like that professional athlete who had 4 good years in the beginning, the best ever debut,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then tapered off. But that debut changed music history, and you and I
Yeah.
as musicians know that the Tom
Yeah.
Scholz sound alone deserves to
Hmm.
me a reason for posterity. Speaking
Yeah.
of which, you mentioned Prince.
Hmm.
One of what I characterize as one of those few legendary unicorns of music, right?
Hmm.
I put him in the same league as a Frank Zappa, someone who literally can take the interpretation of music and convert it into something out of this world. Who were your ultimate individual big influences? Who did you look to get inspiration as both an instrumentalist and a songwriter that made you feel like you were in the right place playing music because they existed?
Well, sort of as a general songwriter performer, I think Buddy Holly's been a strong influence on me. There's a band from San Diego called the Paladins. The guitar player in the Paladins is a guy named Dave Gonzalez, and I've always loved his playing. I've been a longtime fan of the Fabulous Thunderbirds and Jimmy Vaughn's playing,
Mm.
and the Downey, California band, the Blasters. Dave Alvin and his brother Phil were the kind of anchor points of the Blasters, and they're all bands that, as I was saying earlier, they're rock and roll bands, possibly not so much the Fabulous Thunderbirds. I don't know. I know they admit they play rock and roll, but I think they prefer to be recognized as blues artists. There's a range to their repertoire that is more than just the label on the CD bin or the record bin, for the category. There's crossover and all of that stuff, and I appreciate the reaction. And one of the things I was thinking about, uh, you know, at times is that the 50s bands that I admire so much, when they'd be playing a nightclub or a bar, they wouldn't just be playing rock and roll songs. They'd be playing things the audience want to hear. So they'd play the odd Broadway show tune if they knew it and it was requested. They'd play, if they were a Texas band, they'd play a two-step or a polka and something to get the the audience worked up. Um, Other artists that I have great admiration for, and an envious admiration for, as far as skills go, are people like T-Bone Walker as a
Mm.
guitar player and a songwriter. I love Louis Jordan, Howlin' Wolf, Johnny Guitar Watson, all those guys. And a lot of people that many people have never heard of. One of the guys that I just love from the rockabilly era is a guy named Joe Clay, who was from Louisiana. And he never had any big hits, but if you're a rockabilly nerd, you know him right away. And musicians have huge admiration for him. And he only had a couple of regional records. he had to do a ballad on the one time he had an opportunity to be on Ed Sullivan, because he Ed wasn't into the rock and roll at that point. Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps and his guitar player, Cliff Gallup, were huge. Anyone who plays rockabilly guitar is, an acolyte of Cliff Gallup's. So much so that, I mean, he was a huge influence on Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck did an entire album's tribute LP to Gene Vincent covers, featuring note-for-note copies of Cliff Gallup's solos and rhythm parts from all those early Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps records. So, yeah.
And there's another unicorn for you that we lost, sadly, which was Mr. Beck. I loved what he did during those early 70s, where he got exposure to Mahavishnu Orchestra, and then got George Martin and started doing the most extraordinary layered, harmonic, extraordinary music, making his guitar sing. And that's what these types of wizards can do.
Yeah. Now, when I was coming up playing in bands prior to the one that I'd mentioned earlier in our chat, I was in a band at art college, and we did a couple of Beck era Yardbirds songs, and I love that stuff. There's a Swingin Blackjacks version of Heart Full of Soul on the new record, and it doesn't sound like Beck, but I know how to do it. I know how to do that when pressed, right? I can play those parts.
That's a gift for your audience, because then they get to hear your interpretation of something that is very intimate to your heart, that you grew up with, interpreted in a way that modern audiences can appreciate.
People tell me they like it.
And that's usually the best rule of thumb, right? As soon as you hear they like it, you give them more. As a final question for you, Matt, maybe tell me about what you've got planned over the next few months as a band. I know that Swingin Blackjacks has done pubs, restaurants, festivals, concert tours. What are you planning to do in the months ahead, and what are you most looking forward to as a musician and a member of this band?
Well, just continuing to do what we love doing together. It's been a long time getting a full-length recording together. In 2018, the band got a kind of a scholarship or grant through a venue that we were regular performers at. It was called the Amy Louie Grossman's Music Scholarship. So we got some money, we packaged our 4-song recording, and it got released in 2020. Now, I had some health concerns in 2019 that kind of delayed that. And then in 2020, just as we were ready to kind of get things, rolling again and build on the release of the 4-song EP, the COVID pandemic occurred. And that was, with lockdowns going back and forth. But we finally got the record done, the new one. And we're playing over the next couple of months. We've got a number of shows coming up. Some of them are, smaller scale, more what we're used to, but we're playing some theater shows as a double bill with the Johnny Max Band. The next one's coming up in Collingwood on the 27th of March at the Simcoe Street Theater. We're getting a little bit further afield from our greater Toronto area base. I don't even live in Toronto any longer. I've lived in Muskoka in Huntsville for the last close to 25 years. And we're going to be in St. Catharines on the 14th of March at a place called Someplace Else. We have a couple of house gigs in the GTA. One is a monthly appearance at Smoke Show Barbecue and Brew at Eglinton and Mount Pleasant Road. And every 8 weeks, we play on the Danforth, just 2 doors away from the Danforth Music Hall at Noonan's Pub. We're there every 2 weeks, or sorry, every 2 months. Forgive me. And then we have more things going on. I've got lots of festival applications out. And I think one of the things that I've realized over the last couple of years, and waiting for things to get a little more the way they were as far as music opportunities go, the couple of things I've taken away is you don't plan for months ahead. You plan for years ahead, which is what I'm in the process of doing. And you take advantage of everything, or you try for everything and see what happens, rather than just saying, well, I don't think that's suitable for us, or you cast your line and you see what you catch, right? So
I think that's a suitable philosophy for a band with the name like Swingin Blackjacks, which I have to ask you, I'd be remiss if I don't. Why the name? Who came up with the name, and what does it mean to you and the band?
Well, I'm kind of the mad genius for all this stuff. My background, post-secondary education background's in graphic design, so anything you see visual that's associated with the band is my doing. I'm the primary original songwriter and the chooser of covers. If I have to sing it, I pick it. So the Blackjacks, I think originally I wanted to just call it the Blackjacks. I've always liked film noir and vintage hard-boiled detective stories. And you probably are aware that a blackjack is something you hit people on the head with. It's also referred to as a sap or a cosh in Great Britain. And a lot of times I'll choose a band name and then I'll find out somebody's already got it. So I was aware, I think at one point, like a pre-Beatles and Silver Beatles kind of post-Quarrymen, the Blackjacks might have been a name that Paul McCartney and George Harrison and John Lennon were using very, very briefly. I'd have to fact check that, but I'm not sure. But there were Blackjacks all over the place. Before that, we had a couple of other names, but then I just stuck Swingin in front of Blackjacks, knowing that it hadn't been taken. And it's kind of it's a bit of an in joke, because to hit somebody on the head with a blackjack, you have to swing it. And it's also a reference to the type of rhythms the band performs. So that's the deep philosophical reasoning behind the name of the band.
It's like a triple entendre. You'll always have the audience thinking that if they hit 21, they've just won something in the house of music.
Yeah.
Matt, I appreciate this. Continued success to you.
Thank you.
And Gary and Adam. And may this summer prove to be the kind of touring schedule that continues to keep you vibrant, vital, and feeling good about the world around you.
Well, that's I'm like I said, I'm really pleased that you wanted to have a chat with me today, and thank you for your time, Mary. It's been a pleasure.
I'm lying, you might think it's a joke. Well, I can do without the music lights and cigarette smoke. You see,